well, excuse me, write a while loop by asking the user for an integer. And looping as long as that integer is strictly greater than zero. So as long as you're entering something that's positive. Uh, Transform your while loops, put a space right there, so that the program displays the sum of all the numbers entered while exiting the loop. So essentially, first thing we're going to do is we want to build a while loop that's going to continuously loop as long as we are getting a number that is not that is greater than zero. Or excuse me, yeah, that's greater than zero. Excuse me. Yes. Okay. So as soon as we enter a zero or below or a negative number, essentially, then what will happen is we'll exit the loop. That's what we want to happen. Um, so first off, let's think about the meat of the loop first. Well, obviously, we know it's going to be a while loop, so we go and write while. If I can actually write it, there it is. While, and then the condition, and then of course the body. We'll worry about the condition. I'm going to put true for now, just as a kind of a placeholder, and we'll continue to loop. And so that we right now we have an infinite loop, but that way we can concentrate on the more important things, like what we want to actually take place. So within the loop we want to take place is we want to ask the user about a number, and we want the user to enter a number. We want to test to see if that number is in fact greater than zero. So first thing we're going to do is, because we're eventually going to be putting doing this test in our condition. So that means we need to define the number outside of the loop. So it does say integer, so that's pretty self-explanatory. We'll call it user for the user's input, and I'm gonna set it equal to well, nothing for right now, and we'll go from there. So we enter into our loop. First thing we need to do is we need to ask the user. So we need to prompt the user, because without prompting, obviously, the user doesn't know what to give us. So the first thing we do is console.writeLine. And I'll say enter a positive, or enter an integer. That is, and we'll say use the same verbiage as above. Strictly greater than 0. So there we go, prompt. Now, of course, we have to read. So there's a couple ways we can just do a simple int parse and just make some assumptions. I don't know what the rest of this. I'll start with just assuming that they're going to give us good values, and then I'll make it a little more advanced, and we'll use the try parse. But to start, we'll just do int parse. So user equals int.parse console.readline, readline, excuse me, and that will read a string and parse it into an integer for us from the user, of course. So there we have. So now we have our users given a value. Our variable has been given the value from the user, and we've parsed it into an integer so that it can take it. Right, and now of course we would test it. So in this particular setup, I would use an if statement and say if user is strictly greater than 0, then you know what, we want to continue looping if that's the case. So I'm going to negate this little deal here. So I'm going to negate that whole statement. So basically, if this is not the case, then break. Boom. So essentially, what this if statement does is gives our break statement. So let's break us out of the while loop, and we'll continue to loop more or less forever until we enter something that's less than 0, or 0 and less than. So we'll go ahead and build and run it. Oh wow, build mapping happened pretty fast. There you go. Okay, enter greater than 0. I'm gonna say 6, 4, 8, 0, and since I entered 0, we exit. So that handled the first one. If I go and change this to the second one, I can even do this here. I can just say else. So this is basically saying if in fact the user did enter something we wanted to, we're going to need to have some variable to hold this value that I'm about to put in here. Sum, and we'll set sum equal to 0. All right, and we come down here, and we're going to say sum, and we're going to do the plus equals little guy here, which is basically taking plus equals user. So this adds user value. It takes that user value and it adds it to sum, and then stores that that summation to sum. And then at the end, we want to display what sum is. So that's console.readline, readline, writeline, console.writeline. Sorry. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of context, make it sound a little better. So I'll use string interpolation. So the sum of all numbers entered is sum. Bam, bam, thank you, ma'am. There it is. Build. Oop, wrong button. Come on now. Okay, let's try this again. There we go. All right. So enter 3, 2, 1, 0, 6. All right, so that summed up all our numbers. Summed up all our numbers. That's the short and skinny on this. So that essentially is the whole thing. I'm going to take it a couple steps further. I'm going to put our if statement, or rather our condition for our if statement, up here in this while loop. I'm literally just going to copy and paste and get rid of you. Alright, I'll just drag it up there. If goes away, and then I'm going to make an else an if statement. Or you know what? Scratch that. I don't need that. And we're going to get rid of this guy here, because we want this to continue to loop as long as this is. As long as they're entering. Hold up. Yeah. So as long as we're giving us good values, we loop. Yes. And then I'm going to give user here a value. It doesn't really matter as long as it's a value that will satisfy our condition. So I'm just going to give it 1. So that way it continues to loop. Since we have that 1, it'll enter the while loop. Otherwise, we have to have a value in here, but it's not important value because we're going to change it as soon as we enter our while loop. So if you would like to see that happen in action, let's see this happen. Now that we changed our condition, it's going to say it should theoretically, everything working the way it should, in my mind, working correctly, anyways. It should work the way we want it to work and work the exact same way it did before. So I'll enter the exact same numbers: 3, 2. So far so good. 1, and then end 0, and boom. And our sum is still 6, which it should have been. All right, excellent. So far so good, right? Okay, so now we've. Ooh, I don't want to do a lot. Yes. So now we have this nice little neat and concise program here. We create a user variable, and it's an integer instead of equal to 1. That's basically a throwaway value, just a holding value, so that we actually enter into our loop. We have our sum, which is also an integer value, set to equal to 0, because we want to start counting from 0. Then we come to our while loop, test our condition. Of course, it's 1, once is greater than 0. So we enter into our while loop, display the prompt, store the user's, read from the user, parse it into integer, and store it into user. And then we take that value that they just entered and add it to sum, and store that summation to sum. And then we continue looping as long as that number they entered is a valid number. Here's a problem though. We don't want to add this number, so I'm going to run this real quick, and I want to show you something that I just caught. Whether or not you caught or not, we'll see. So I'm going to do it again. 3. But this time I'm going to enter -3 immediately, right? So our sum should be 3. It shouldn't be changed from 3, because 3 should be our dump. As soon as we hit 3, we get out, right? Or that negative, excuse me. But it's 0, because what's happening? There we are. What's happening is that it's changing the value and then adding the value. We don't want to add the value, however, if in fact it's the wrong value. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put an if statement in front of, around our deal here. There we are. And then I'll literally just copy our condition here. And so this way, if they do in fact enter a negative number, if they do in fact enter a negative number, we don't screw up and add that negative number to our user's number. And then to go a few steps further, we can make this int parse to a try parse. So that means we have to change some things around a bit. I'm not sure if that's exactly part of this at all, but I'm going to do it anyway, just because it never hurts to go over try parse again. So if you remember, for try parse, we're going to need a few more variables. So for try parse, you need the boolean, you need a string, excuse me, boolean, a string, and a whatever type of value, data type you're trying to store into. In this case, be integer. So boolean, we obviously need boolean, so I'm going to go and write my boolean here, and I'll just call it test. And I don't believe I need to give it a value as of yet, so because I won't be using it. I won't be using it in the actual loop, or the conditional loop, excuse me. So define my boolean up there. So we definitely need the boolean. We definitely need our integer, which we have as our user. For the string, you don't necessarily have to have that string variable. You can use the console.readline as you do in the parse. That way it's the same kind of, so you still get the string value, you just don't have to have it. And now if you needed to sort for whatever other reason, by all means, yes, make a variable. But in this instance, I don't think we're going to need to know what they wrote exactly. So like if you want to write a fancy like error message like, hey, that's not the correct, that's not a valid value. so on and so forth. Um, so yeah. So we'll go and write our try parse here. And actually, in writing a try parse, I'm going to make this a do while as well. And since I'm making that a do while, I don't need to give user a value. I should put the do up here. So since I'm not giving the user, since I'm doing the user, excuse me, reading from the user before I test our while condition, I don't need to give it a value up here. So I would argue in this instance, a do while is a little bit better. Okay, I'm just going to comment this line out just so we have it for reference. And yes. I'm going to change our condition if statement to and test. So basically, as long as the test is true, i.e. they give us a valid value, then we continue on, and then they'll add it. Because you want to add something that's not a value that you can add to an integer, because you'll break your program. Try parse, gotcha. All right, so test, so our boolean equals int dot try parse. And in our try parse, we're going to have our, so it even gives you the until sense, I guess you call it, gives us nice little hints here. So we have the string called s. So our little guys here, string.s, and then it has our out int result, right? So these are pretty useful. If you ever are writing code and you get kind of confused about what you need to write, these will kind of help guide, or can, not always, but can help kind of guide you in what you need to put in what order and what have you not. So we tell us that we need to have the string first. We don't have the string variable, so we're going to use that console.readline. So I'll go ahead and write that for us. Console.readline. Where'd you go? Boom. Okay, so now we have our string. Going throw a comma right there. So now we have our out variable. So put our out keyword. And our out variable is user. Enter that, semicolon. And there we have it. So, yeah. And what I would do, I would actually probably do this as well. Yeah, so we want to loop only while it's a positive value. Don't care if there's not a better or not. I would give them a warning, like, hey, if they, for instance, they give us the user enters something that's not an integer, for instance, we can go and give them an error message, if you will, telling them, hey, that's not the right value. It's not gonna, and then say it's not the right value. We didn't add that to the sum, something along those lines. So if, and for my condition, I'm going to say not test, because so if test is false, if test is false, then console.writeLine, read write line. Invalid input. All right. Oh, I'm going in the wrong place. There we go. Invalid input. So I just kind of let them know, like, hey, that's not the right thing to put in. Okay, so this should all work the same way, except we have that kind of safety net, if you will, like keeps the user honest. So let's go ahead and run that and see how well it works out. So integer strictly greater than 0. I'm going to start off being a not a great guy. I'm going to literally write the 1. Invalid input. And it's going to, oh no, we don't want to exit. Okay, so it exits it. Exit. Let's find out why. Ah, that is why. Very well. Okay, so I see the issue here. So the biggest issue that we're going to run into this is that, ah, you know what I would, let's do this. So what's happening is we're actually testing the value, and the value gets, this is, when they enter something that's not an integer, in this case. Test is sent to false, and user sent to the default value. Default value is 0. 0 is not greater than 0, which is why we exited. So in order to kind of get around that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a continue. That way, what happens is if test is false, so if they've entered something that's not a valid number, then what will happen is that we display this invalid input. There we go. Invalid input, and then we hit this continue. And what happens with continue? Instead of going on with our code down here and hitting the while loop, we actually go straight up to the top. So we'll test this again. Write out 1, and that still didn't do what I wanted to do. Well, that stinks. Look at this. User equals 1. So that way, so it is hitting this condition. It's going to the condition was the problem, even with the continue, which isn't necessarily bad. So what we'll do is we hit this condition 1, or sorry, this user equals 1, but by hitting continue, we skip this if statement, which is good because you don't want to add that 1 because that 1's not a good one, right? It's a bad one. So I'm more or less changing the default, if you will, from 0 to 1 so that I can continue looping. Let's see, let's try this once more. It should work. Yay, it worked. Okay, so now I'm going to enter the actual 1 and then on to 0. So it should be 1. Let's find out. It is 1. Good. Everything worked the way it wanted to work. So now we have everything. I think now this is about as good as we're going to get with what we have. So this is probably more advanced than what the question was actually asking. And we can get rid of this bit here since that's covered by this if statement. Yes. And just for making it a little more clean here, I'm going to clean this up a bit more. There we are. Okay, so now we asked them for an integer, and we loop as long as the integer is strictly greater than 0. Then we've transformed the loop so that it displays the sum of the numbers while at the exit once it exits the loop. And then we went a few steps further to assure that what they've entered is in fact a number. Yeah. So I hope that answers all your questions about this portion of one of the labs, I believe it was. And if you have any others, please do not hesitate to ask, email, or leave a comment down below, as always. Yes, so thank you very